Shabbat Shalom. It's interesting when you talk about knowing someone or knowing the Lord, that it always comes back to spending time with people and, as Colleen mentioned, to listen. It's surprising what you pick up that you don't even realize you know. I like Facebook for the fact that it brings up old memories. And this morning on Facebook, I had gone to visit Dad 6 years ago in the care center. And I had to wake him up. And I thought I'd better because, lucky if I saw him once a week. And I woke him up and I said, well, how are you doing? He said, oh, I must be okay. I can still complain. And I read that and I thought, oh, my goodness. It reminds me of my dad. It's just so him. Here he's 98. And we get to know each other by being around each other, by listening and opening ourselves up. And one of the things, Greg was joking about men and women. In general, and it's not always true, women are a little better at getting to know people than men. Men tend to be a little bit more process-oriented, and women tend to be a little more relationship-oriented. But in either case, the ability to listen, to observe, to allow someone else to intrude upon your life and change it is good for us and always difficult. We kind of have our agenda and away we go. And this is very much me. I put my nose in a direction and watch out. In Leviticus 18, we have a chapter that's a bit graphic, I guess I would say. It describes some of the things that God does not like or does not want in His people. And we're going to visit about that a little. Let's start by reading it. Leviticus 18, verse 1, Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, I am Yahweh your God. You shall not do what is done in the land of Egypt, where you lived, nor are you to do what is done in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. You are to perform my judgments and keep my statutes to live in accord with them. I am Yahweh your God. So you shall keep my statutes and my judgments, by which a man may live if he does them. I am Yahweh. There's a lot in that passage. First off, I found it significant that God says, I don't want you to do what they did where you left. And I don't want you to do what they do where you're going. I want you to do what I ask you to do. And that's why he starts off, I am Yahweh your God. As human beings, I'm one of these that believes we have to have something to worship. We worship something or someone. We do. We're built that way. We bow down to something. We pay homage to something. We are not in a vacuum. We worship something. And God says, I'm God, not all these other things that are competing. And then he goes on to say, the way people can tell that I'm your God is you do what I say. And really, that's kind of simple. And sometimes in Christianity, we get so tied into salvation is by grace and by faith, which is so true. But if you don't do what God says, don't be surprised if the world looks at you and doesn't think that you're a Christian. There's the great story about the lady who was driving home, and a policeman pulled her over, and she couldn't figure out because she didn't think she had done anything wrong. And he says, ma'am, I want to check and see if this is a stolen car. And she says, why? And then he said, well, your car has a big bumper sticker that says, say yes to the man from Galilee. I follow Jesus. Jesus is my captain. And he said, you blew off 3 people going through the red light. You honked at everybody in front of you, and he said, I figured this car was stolen. And it's a funny little story, but ouch. The way we live is how people know if we follow the Lord. It's not if we're perfect. No one, it's silly. No one expects someone, quote, to be perfect. But they do expect us to behave with integrity. They expect us to behave with certain attributes that mark us as followers of Yahweh. And so that's how this starts. God says, you left Egypt, don't act like them. You're going to Canaan, don't act like them. I'm your God, do what I say. And I think it's kind of sad that we get so wrapped up in this, you can't earn salvation. Well, that's not, no one's saying that. It's not about earning salvation. It's about looking saved. And Yeshua said something interesting in John 17. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. How many of you find yourself just wanting the world to like you? I do. I want the world to like me. I want to be accepted. There's something very strong that wants to be appreciated. And yet Yeshua says, you've accepted my word, and the world doesn't like you any more than it likes me. And then he said, he's praying to the Father. This is the high priestly prayer. It's what it's termed, John 17. And he's speaking to the Father. He says, I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. This is exactly what God tells the children of Israel. You're not of Egypt. You're not of Canaan. You're my people. I'm asking you to behave in certain ways that will show the world you're mine. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have also sent them into the world. For their sakes I sanctify myself, that they themselves may also be sanctified in truth. What does sanctified mean? It means to be made holy. And so often people think holy and they think righteous and good. That could have that meaning. Holy means to be separate. It means to be different. In fact, if you went through your Bible, especially your Old Testament, every time it uses the word holy, if you use set apart, that's really more what the word means. The set apart, set apart, set apart God. He's not like us. And Derek Prince had a great analogy that I've never forgotten. He said, the church, God's people, are like a ship. And the sea is like the world. And it's fine for the ship to be in the sea. It's not fine for the sea to be in the ship. And you'll notice that today, the people of God are confused because they're not sure. What are we supposed to do? How should we look? How will we represent the Lord? The next part of this chapter becomes very explicit. And I've always thought, well, why does God have to be so explicit? Because you can kind of summarize the rest of it by saying, none of you shall approach any blood relative to uncovered nakedness. I am Yahweh. Then it goes into all this detail about the people you're allowed to have relationships with, or the person, and the ones you're not. And I thought, when this was given, maybe people were the same way they are today. I think, I could be wrong, but I think if you look at the world today, this is the area where the world is the most unlike Yahweh. Because the world, and I'll talk about this a little later, the world is willing to do anything and give anything and pay anything to have sexual relationships in the manner, with whom, and when they want. And for Yahweh to come and say, nope, it's this way or none. It's countercultural. It will make the world hate you. How many of you would say that today people would like if you say, well, sex should be in marriage and that's it? That's completely ridiculous. I defy you to watch any kind of entertainment and find that message carried over. And yet God starts, he says, don't do what they do in Egypt, don't do what they do in Canaan, do my statutes. Number one, do not uncover the nakedness, and then he lists all these people. And I'm not going to go through it because you know, I mean, your sister, your mother, I mean, it's things you're going, and it's interesting how strong some taboos are. But you know today that we have books written by people about having sexual relationships with family. We're not to judge or condemn. Well, you know, it's not my job to judge and condemn people. But I can't stand up and say, that is perversion. That breaks down this wall that makes God's people separate from the world. That is letting the sea into the ship. And it goes on from verse 6 to verse 18, talking about all these things you shall not do. Then in verse 19, it says you're not to approach a woman during her period. And then it says things that seem obvious to me. You shall not have intercourse with your neighbor's wife. All right, where does this rank on sins in America today? Is this a real bad one or is this okay? We have removed all the criminal penalties for adultery in this country because we don't believe it's wrong. And if you think I'm saying I want to hurt people and savage people, no, I don't. But how many people get hurt because we don't keep God's laws? Take this one. Don't have a relationship with your neighbor's wife. We've all seen this happen. It's like a bomb going off. It injures both families. It injures the children. The in-laws, the outlaws. It's a disaster. And yet, if you watch a program, read a book, this will be put forth as value-free. You know, if you don't think you should do it, you shouldn't. And if you're okay with it, then it's okay. I find it amazing that this starts off with describing these things, because that's probably not the first thing I would have picked was sexual relationships. Then it goes on to say, you know, don't have sex with your neighbor's wife to be defiled, and it uses this word. How many of you think that in our culture today there's anything that's defiling? There are things in our culture today that are defiling. Being intolerant and being racist. The problem is who defines it? How do I know what's intolerant and racist? I have to listen to the 6 o'clock news. I don't find out in my Bible. And I would suggest most of us right now are politically upset because we spend more time listening to the news than we do reading our Bible. We don't know what God thinks. We know what CNN or Fox or Rush Limbaugh, I don't care who it is. A lot of them are good people. But we become full of what they say, and then we think we're going to be able to make judgments based on what God thinks. You shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Moloch, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am Yahweh. You shall not lie with the male as one lies with a female is an abomination. Also, you shall not have intercourse with any animal to be defiled with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate with it. It is a perversion. These are disgusting. They're happening all the time. I can find you places where you can go watch it and pay to watch. I think when you look at this whole concept of the sexual relationship, which was created by God, which is a wonderful thing, which is the source of procreation, it's a blessing that God gave this to mankind. But it's like everything God gave us that's good, He put boundaries around it. And the society we live in today and societies throughout time hate boundaries. How many of you remember growing up and having your parents tell you you can't go there or you can't be there at this time or whatever? They gave you boundaries, and what was your response? Generally, we don't like boundaries. When I was a kid, we were not allowed to sneak over to the center in peace after dark. There's nothing in the world worse than stealing something from the pantry and the light goes on and it's Larry. Some of you may never have experienced this. But they're boundaries, and boundaries actually make us healthy and safe. And when people are raised up in the fear of the Lord, the boundaries are internal. They don't need laws. I mean, I think about how many of you around here will leave your keys in the ignition of your car? Probably a lot of you. The truth is, Jerry did once and wished he didn't. It eventually came back. But why do you dare do that some places? And why do so many people lock their doors and lock? Because we're afraid that other people won't respect boundaries. And if there's anything that looks like God, it's respect of boundaries. Deuteronomy 27, the Lord says, "Cursed is he that moves a boundary stone." If God has made a line, and with sex he's made a line. He said it's allowed in a marital covenant union. There it's blessed and it's a good thing. Outside of that, it's outside of God's plan. This is not popular. Even saying this qualifies me for hate speech. I don't hate the people that don't do this, but I do think there is blessing. In my life, I've seen the blessing of obeying those boundaries. When we break the boundaries, I'm so grateful there's repentance and healing. But what's killing us as a society is saying there are no boundaries. In fact, the boundary we have is I'm not allowed to say, what you're doing is wrong. I can't say that. When you look at holiness, and this is what defines God, holiness is completely defined by boundaries. God is here, he's not there. See, I even see this with the disputes we have over immigration. I'm all for immigration. There's absolutely nothing wrong with immigration. It's good for people to come into a country. If you come into a country other than through a door, you're there illegally. You tell me, how do you know what's the country and what isn't? The boundary. How do you know what is you and what isn't? Boundaries. Without boundaries, there's no definition and there's no individual. Whether it's a nation or a human being, you absolutely need boundaries. In fact, when we look at the way into the presence of God, and that's something that we've been focusing on in this prayer effort, if my people who are called by my name, so it's defining them. This is the people of Israel. Will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, which means to come into my presence and turn from their wicked ways. Everything here is pictures of boundaries, holiness, and conforming my way to be like God's ways. You go down to verse 24. Do not defile yourselves by any of these things, for by all these the nations which I am casting out before you have become defiled. So God said, I judged Egypt because they defiled, and I've judged Canaan because they defiled the land. When you defile the land, what happens? God says the land will vomit you out. This is especially true when the land is Israel. A lot of people don't think that these, I was listening to somebody who I really love and esteem, but they were saying, well, 2 Chronicles 7 doesn't apply to the United States, it only applies to Israel. And I'm like, well, it certainly applies to Israel. It applies to the Temple Mount. But if it applies to God's people who are called by his name, it's going to have application everywhere. And I don't know if you realize this, when you look at the nation we live in today, the United States, if you study Deuteronomy 27 and 28, which are about the curses and the blessings, and especially chapter 28, the first 15, 18 verses are about what will happen if you serve the Lord and you keep his statutes and judgments. You'll be blessed in the city, in the country. He'll bless your kneading trough. He'll bless your animals. He'll bless your fields. You'll be the head, not the tail. This describes the United States of America. If you can't tell that, then I better give you a history class. We have been the head. A lot of people want to pretend we're not. We are. Get over it. It's a responsibility. Doesn't mean we're better than other nations. Does anybody here have any shadow of a doubt that the U.S. is the head of the nations? Do you find an odd impulse in us to shuck this responsibility? We don't want to be it. We're not better than other people. It doesn't mean it has nothing to do with being better than others. My point is that we have been the head and not the tail. We have been under the blessings of Deuteronomy 28. Are we a perfect country? No, we're not. Are you like me, afraid now that we are doing things that are defiling the land? I am afraid. And when you defile the land, what happens? Verse 24, do not defile yourselves by any of these things, for by all these the nations which I am casting out before you have become defiled. For the land has become defiled. Therefore I have brought its punishment upon it, so the land has spewed out its inhabitants. But as for you, you are to keep my statutes and my judgments. You shall not do any of these abominations, neither the native nor the alien who sojourns among you. In other words, the Lord says, in my land, I don't care if you're part of Israel or you're just living with the Israelites, these things will not be done or they will defile the land. Do you have any idea where we are in terms of sexual sin in the United States? It's always been there. The difference is that no longer do we condemn it. We no longer say it is wrong. Now we say it's okay. That's where the defiling happens. Read Romans 1. Humans are always going to mess up. Humans are going to sin sexually. This is going to happen. But if there's a line drawn, then there's a way to say, I've sinned. I'm going to turn from my wicked ways. There's a way to come back to not being defiled, to the holy. But when you tear down the wall and you say, nothing matters, then you have what you have today, which is frightening. And maybe I'm extreme here, but when I see what's out there, I'm thinking, for me to say what I am today is revolutionary in some circles. And I'm not saying anything revolutionary. I'm just saying what we've always known. As for you, you are to keep my statutes, my judgments, this is verse 26, and shall not do any of these abominations, neither the native nor the alien who sojourns among you. For the men of the land who have been before you have done all these abominations, and the land has become defiled, so that the land will not spew you out, should you defile it, as it has spewed out the nation which has been before you. In other words, keep my commandments. For whoever does any of these abominations, those persons who do so shall be cut off from among the people. Thus you are to keep my charge, that you do not practice any of the abominable customs which have been practiced before you, so as not to defile yourselves with them. I am Yahweh your God. There's an old story in the Talmud about a man, a righteous man who lived in Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is obviously an apocryphal story. But every day, he was a seller of vegetables, he was a fruit vendor. He would go out and he'd go up and down the streets of Sodom and Gomorrah crying out against the wickedness of the land and the city. And every day he'd do it. No one pay attention. They all make fun of him. One day, somebody that knew him said, why do you keep doing this? It's not making any difference. No one's listening to you. He says, I'm doing this so that I don't change. I'm doing this so that I don't compromise. I'm doing this so that I stay true to what I know is true. This is where we find ourselves today. Jesus didn't come. Yeshua didn't come to condemn the world. He came to save it. But if we allow ourselves to be enticed by those voices out there today, we're going to find ourselves changing until we adopt the customs, the practices, and the morals of the culture, which I have to tell you are repulsive to God. We've been humbling ourselves, we've been praying, and I've been thinking about this, turning from your wicked ways and wondering, well, I don't have any wicked ways, I'm pretty good. It's like my dad said something once, I loved it because it was damning for me, but it showed me who I was. He said, Dad said one time I was praying, and I suddenly realized that I thought God was lucky to have me. He said the Holy Spirit kind of pointed out to him that was not exactly how it was. and we can get comfortable and think, oh, I'm pretty good. And I think a lot of us, the Lord has blessed us, and our lives are pure and have integrity. But on the other hand, we know how much can we do for our land? Because when we pray this prayer that we've been praying, Chronicles 7, every day at 7, I pray for my land here, my house, my community, my valley, my county, my state, my nation. And Lord, what have we done? And I got thinking about this, not offering anything to Moloch, and a lot of people have differing views on that, and I'll talk a little about it. But one of the things that came to me when I look at our society today, and I'm part of this, and you are, we all are in this, you can tell the value of something by the price you're willing to pay for it. Do you understand what that means? Have you ever examined what our society is willing to pay to have sex the way they want it? What are we willing to pay? In World War I, well, first I can mention, how many of you know what Nathan Hale said just before he was executed? My only regret is what? I have one life to give for my country. How come we all know that? Because to us, giving your life up for freedom and to found this nation is worth it. And so it's hard to be a school kid that doesn't know. My only regret is this, that I have but one life to give for my country. This guy died when he was, what, 22 or something? And yet he's more famous than a lot of us will ever be. It tells us what the price he was willing to pay. Then I was going to tell you about World War I. There's a fellow named Alvin York who was converted in 1915 to a fundamentalist type of Christianity. He really had a powerful encounter with the Lord, but he also felt that he was not to fight. Well, he applied to be a conscientious objector. Well, let me tell you about 1917. They didn't allow it. That just got him in the service quicker. So he was taken into the infantry. He went over to Germany, and on October 8th, 1918, he, by himself, killed 25 German soldiers and took 132 others prisoner. He's considered probably the most valorous man in World War I. He would never talk about it. He didn't think it was that great of a thing. And you ask yourself, why was he willing to do that? Especially someone that had conscientious principles, whether or not he should even kill people. It's because Alvin York believed the United States was worth dying for. I mean, if you haven't ever read the story of Alvin York, get a story, get a book, and read it. If you're if you're a son of my mother, you know these stories. But you see this. One of the ways we know how bad people wanted to keep slavery, well, I'll ask you. How badly did the United States want to keep slavery? How do we know? They were willing to kill people. They were willing to kill family to perpetuate this. And I'm being rather obvious here because I'm leading up to something. Do you have any idea how many families fought each other in the Civil War? And people will say a lot of things about it was a war over states' rights, it was war over federal abuse. It's a war over slavery, okay? Those other words were there to kind of make us feel better about it, maybe. And I've said all this, and I think it's kind of hard to understand. Maybe someone here remembers, Kenneth might. Weren't there about 600,000 people that died in the Civil War? Does that sound right? 400? It was a lot of people. And it was a tragic event. And you realize they illegalized slavery in Great Britain without killing anybody. There's some reasons for this, but I won't go into right now. One of the big ones is it wasn't on their land. It was mostly out in their territories. When you take it into your house, it's much harder to get rid of it. Another thing interesting about the war of slavery is that the slavery that we had in our country was Protestant slavery and not Catholic slavery. And Protestant slavery, for whatever reason, was much worse. You know what the biggest reason was? Because Catholics honored the marriage vow. And if a slave was married and had children, they wouldn't break up the families. Okay, all this to say, what is the price our society is willing to pay today for sexual license? We've talked about Nathan Hale, we talked about Alvin York, we talked about the Civil War. What's the price we're willing to pay to be able to do what we want, when we want, with whom we want? Somebody said it. It's abortion. Why is abortion so important? Why, whenever we talk about women's reproductive rights, does it go right to, I have the right to kill my baby? Or actually, we don't kill my baby. We mess with the words so that they're not so stark. If you haven't met lovely people that believe in abortion, I wish God would bring them into your life. Because there's a lot of wonderful people that think this is okay. But I think, in my mind, this is clearly an example. I talked about the ship being in the sea, and it's bad when the sea is in the ship. This is the sea in the ship. What happens in our society if I kill somebody for whatever reason? I just decide maybe I want something they have, or they know something I don't want other people to know. If I kill someone, what happens to me? I'm going to be put in jail. In many states, I might be killed. I might have, the possibility of capital punishment is there. Why, if killing someone is considered so evil, is abortion not only okay, but we have to keep expanding it? You know, in our country, we've made it a more sacred right than any other country. We constantly, for whatever reason, keep trying to take this right out there to the end of gestation. Why? What are we protecting? Why are we willing to do this? I just read the story and I've already forgotten her name. She's somebody that you shouldn't forget if you know anything about current culture, and I don't. What's John Legend's wife's name? Chrissy. What? Chrissy Teigen. Teigen. Didn't she just have a miscarriage? Yes. And I read the story of her miscarriage and what she went through after she lost her baby, and it almost brought me to tears because I know what it's like to lose a prospective pregnancy. Not me, but I've been around Joy and other women. And the tremendous loss, because what we often forget is when a baby is born, it's only new to the husband. The baby has been a live person for 9 months to the mother. They've sensed the baby in their womb. They've sensed it kick. They've felt its response. They're under no illusion if the baby is alive. Why are we willing to sacrifice these children, and not only to sacrifice them, but to say it is a positive good? If you think you're going to fight this by winning, by going after people, by destroying them, there's something deep down inside of us that we're protecting something. And to protect it, we're willing to give the lives of our children. We've put a price tag on our sexual lifestyle. And is this the worship of Moloch? I don't know. I studied Moloch a little and found out that some scholars believe Moloch was an idol. Others believe Moloch was just a type of child sacrifice. We don't know. And when women abort their baby, a lot of times they're in economic distress. They're in relationship distress. Sometimes it's out of bad circumstances. Rape, incest. But have you ever thought that even when a baby is conceived in incest or rape, why should the baby pay for the hideous crime? And I'm not in favor of telling women what to do in this case. I'm not. But I think it's interesting when you look at it. Whenever you talk about abortion, pro-abort people will usually say, well, we need to keep it legal for the life of the mother, or in these cases of rape, incest. And those are gray areas. Well, what percentage of abortions are for those reasons? Yeah, probably. It is not. The issue is about convenience, the issue about my choice, my body. How many of you know that you don't get pregnant swallowing a watermelon seed? Our willingness to sacrifice the children in our wombs has something to do with what we value. And that's what I would just like to put in your hearts today. What is it our society values that makes this okay? And has it in other ways infected the church? You see, the church usually says the right things on this issue, but if you look at the habits of people in the church, they're aborting at the same rate or higher than the rest of society. Because somewhere they lost the idea of what Yahweh says at the first of this chapter. You're my people. Don't do what they did where you left. Don't do what the people that did where you're going. Nope, you're going to do my way. I thought you might be interested in some statistics. 56 million abortions occur annually from 2010 to 2014. 56 million a year. In 1990 to 94, it was 50 million, so it's going up a little. This is worldwide. Every year, 7 million women are treated for complications from improperly done abortions. And this is a lot of the reasons people say we need to have it legal, so we don't have improperly done abortions. But if people were dying because they were murdered improperly, would we say murder is legal? I don't get this one. In my view, if we as the people of God are going to have anything to say about this, something about the way we live and speak is going to bring a sanctity of life to people, that this would be the last. Let's be honest. There are very few people out there making babies that don't know what causes them. We are willing to pay a price tag. pay a price tag that I think it looks too much like Moloch to me. Every year, 7 million women die for complications from improperly done abortions, and every year, 22,000 women die as a sequela to abortion. Which sounds like a lot, but worldwide, I'm a statistical person, it's not very many. It's still horrible if it's somebody you know. Worldwide, this is a statistic that blew me away. 73% of abortions are done in married women. I did not realize that. That's about 41 million abortions. Something that kind of, again, you find yourself uncomfortable, but I think applying God's boundaries to this. What's the incidence of Down syndrome in Iceland? Trick question. 0. Why? Every baby that's identified with that extra chromosome is aborted. Is the world richer or poorer for the kids that are born with Downs? I've seen some incredibly beautiful people. I don't necessarily think it's a blessing that there are no Down syndrome kids in Iceland. That feels to me like the sea is in the ship. Greg.
I certainly agree that it's important to be real. It's important to know the figures and impact all of this. I was caught a little bit in a situation where somebody was asking me and disagreeing, and they were suggesting that, well, you have to believe this. I don't. And the problem, the question that came to my mind is we can quote all the details, we can quote all the statistics, which is sometimes what you have to do. Or you can read about historical figures all that you want, and documentaries and all of that stuff. But the question that came to my mind is, what am I doing about it? Am I just talking about it? Am I just realizing that, well, those are big statistics, those are big numbers. What am I doing about it? And I think that that's where I have to come in talking about things like this, is that I have to be energized, prepared for action, if you will, to take and do my part. My part is not just talking about it, even though that's good. My part is not just meditating on it, which again is okay. My part is to step out and do what God's calling me to do. If it means going to abortion clinics and intercepting ladies going into an abortion clinic and say, there's another way, I should do that. If it's going to these ladies and say, is it a financial burden? We will pay for the baby. That may be. Or what am I doing? That's the question in my mind. And I can't get away from that. Because if it's one thing that I think I'm hearing correctly from the Spirit, is that get out there. Don't sit back in your seat and be comfortable. Get out there and do what needs to be done, or do what I'm asking you to do. Of course, I can't do it on my own. I know that. But I'm short, to be very perfectly honest with you. I'm long on words and short on action. And I think that is something of a judgment against me as a person. I have to take hold of what God's given to me and then step out and take action.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And we'll talk a little about, actually we're about done. I think one of the things you do need to remember, though, Greg, is you've got to pass on the reasons you believe things to the next generation. Now, this generation has not been hearing this message. They've not been told. that no one's ever got to them and said, why are you thinking abortion is okay? No one's ever pointed out to them, it's the price to pay for sexual license. Someone at least needs to put that in their heads. What's more, you need to ask yourself, what in my attitude chooses life? What brings life? And I think it's important for all of you to know the House of Aaron supports, what's the name of the organization, Dean? Utah something? What is it? Utah Right to Life. We do. We put money into it. And Greg's absolutely right. You need to be willing to do things. But don't ever think, you know what woke me up on this? Some of the kids that grew up around me think abortion is okay. And I realized I've got to be like the guy in Sodom. Even if nobody's listening, I've got to keep saying it. Don't think because you have it inside of you, other people know. Give them the tools to fight. Put out the money, help people. And then the other thing that I wanted to make sure we understand is that abortion is a form of hatred. That's not how people term it. In fact, I went on this pro-abort wall and there was all these beautiful messages that women had written to their aborted fetus. I was grossing out because I don't know about you. Somebody saying something beautiful to me as they cut my head off, it's a little weird. But John says that if we walk in the darkness, and then if we hate our brother, that we walk in the darkness. And then he goes on to say that hatred of our brother is murder. And as I got thinking about it, how many of you have noticed that the tenor of the conversation in the U.S. right now is extremely violent? It's extremely angry. And you know, this is related to the abortion thing. We've come to the place where we think it's okay to say things about people that are violent and harsh and graphic. When we do that, we look like the world. And I was thinking about this, that, you know, Greg has a great point. You have to do something, and you always have to say, oh, Lord, what's my part? And I do know, I'm very grateful we put money behind it. I'm grateful that we speak up to it. But understand that it's a spiritual battle. People that go out there and help women with money and help adopt the child do far more for our cause than those that condemn the girls that don't know where to turn. It doesn't help. But the fact remains that we need a resurgence of love and respect for every human being who is made in the image of God. And I think we all know Proverbs 18:21. I never know the reference. I always have to look it up. But it says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. And those who love it will eat its fruit. And we mentioned here earlier that leprosy in the Bible is very tied to evil speech, to murmuring, to arrogance. And in a certain sense, if you read Hebrew, all these terms describe something that defile the land. It's tameh. It's the exact same word or a very close variant of it, of the words to describe unclean food. Pig and rabbit, all these things are tameh. They are outside the boundary. God never said pigs and rabbits are bad. He said don't eat them. And so when we look at what is the thing we can do that makes us look like the people of God so that people would know that the Spirit is in us? You know, Yeshua said, you are the light of the world, even though he said, I am the light of the world. He said, a city on a hill cannot be hidden, neither do men light a lamp and hide it under a bowl or a bushel. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to the whole house. In the same way, let your light so shine before men that they'll see your deeds or your works and glorify and praise your Father in heaven. I think this is where we are with these issues. Abortion, hatred, murder. How do we speak? How do we live? It can start right at home. See, this is what I was thinking about every day. And I so appreciate what Greg has done here to start us on this prayer effort. Every day when I've got 2 Chronicles 7 memorized now. When I think about that, what's the wicked ways? One of the things that God has told me, and I think it probably would apply to all, but certainly to me, is that one of the most important things you can turn away from is your speech. Do you tear people down? Are you negative? And this isn't to say you shouldn't speak about problems. That's not negative speech. Negative speech, in fact, you can kind of tell negative speech because if I have a problem with Ron and I really want to deal with it, I'll talk to Ron. We got 2 Rons here today. But if I really don't want to deal with it, I just want to be ornery, I talk to Dean. That's how we do it. If I have a problem with Dean, then I talk to Ron. That's because I don't want to do anything about it. I just want to give into this thing where Paul says we bite and devour each other. And when you look at it, we are blessed in the community, and we're so blessed with the goodwill. I don't want to in any way downplay that. But I think one of the things we can do in the community and in our interactions in the valley and wherever we go is say, Lord, anoint my tongue to speak things that build up. Anoint my tongue to bring life. If the power of death and life is in the tongue, then that's probably the place we can start. And I don't know about you, but I desperately want to see our land be healed. And I think it is being defiled by so many things. But one of the worst things, in fact, you look at the riot at the Capitol and the Black Lives Matter through the summer, and in no sense do I want to be political here, even though they're completely political. But most of the bad stuff that happens in all these instances, they're words that keep being spoken and keep being spoken and keep being stirred up until somebody has to do something. How about if our words are, we love, we care? This is you see, what I noticed, it kind of goes way back to where Greg started today. Wives getting to know their husbands, and husbands getting to know their wives, and sometimes husbands thinking they never will. It's like the Facebook meme. Facebook is wonderful, really. If you'd avoid the politics, Facebook is wonderful. There's a picture of a fellow that says, I finally got the mail, in the mail, not the meal, a book telling me how to understand women. And it shows a guy standing in front of a table, and there's a book this high, and he opens the first page, and he just has this lost look on his face. But the truth is, we can learn to understand each other. When you look at the Black Lives Matter thing, or the riot at the Capitol, how much of this can be done away with by people actually listening to the pain in people? Sometimes, like me, I did this to my wife, and I've learned a little. I haven't learned everything. I learned a long time ago with Joy, don't listen rationally for what she's saying. Shut your mind off and let your heart listen to what's coming out. I still don't do this all the time, but guys, it works a lot better when I do that. I even found that out with her dad. I could never figure out what Hebrew was saying. One time I stopped and the Lord said, just listen to his heart. I heard everything he was saying. I figured it out. Because I was such a stupid idiot. I was going to force him into this mold that intellectually says things the way I do. That's not how it works. It's time to close. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful that we can be like a city on a hill. I'm grateful we're not like everything else. We're not better, but there has to be a difference between the people of God and the people that are not of God. And Yeshua said this thing. He said, I'm giving you the right. As many as believe, to them gave he the right to become sons of God. The power. And then he defined it. This is how the sons of God are. They're peacemakers. This is what the sons of God look like. They pray for the ones who persecute them, and they bless those who despitefully use them. This is the difference that I think God is looking for today. a difference that will change the world and not condemn the world, because there's something in us that wants to speak against it, to get on our pedestal and shout. It doesn't change much. But I'll tell you, if the light of Yeshua, if the light of Jesus is in us and we let it out, that will change the world. And it is changing the world. Let's all stand. Brother Ron Eldridge, would you close for us, please?